My name is Mark Doering-Powell, and you're listening to the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey Ben, how's it going?
It's going awesome. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Who's on the show today?
It is amazing DP Mark Doering-Powell. He's somebody, we've never really talked to anybody who works in the half-hour comedy space, and he kind of is the half-hour comedy space. He's done so much work in that world, and also was kind of an early innovator in shooting features in HD. Really, really interesting talk.
Yeah, he and I think we've never really maybe ever met in person, or only maybe met very much in passing, but we've spoken a bunch of the years. But during his career, when I was working in rentals, I was aware of his shows that would be going out from the rental houses I would work in. And I've sold equipment to rental houses recently that I know where he was shooting, and it was nice to connect. It was nice to have a conversation.
Yeah, and actually you talk about that a little bit in the interview. It's very interesting.
Spoiler, yes, we do some of that, yeah. Hey, Ben, it's been an interesting week. As you may be aware, the IATSE union negotiations are going on right now to renew the contract, and it is frightfully busy in town right now. There is a lot of stage stuff going on. There's a lot of productions, and there's an open letter in Deadline as of last week in which top cinematographers call on producers to address the brutally long workdays. And, this comes up, it seems like every time the IATSE contract gets renewed, and nothing really ever gets done about it. What's your take on all this?
Workdays in the film industry are in fact brutally long, and I can attest to that. It's rare to work on a project where the hours for some poor schmo on the set, or some giant group of poor schmoes, doesn't sometimes exceed 14 hours. That's on a normal day. But I've had friends in various departments on huge stuff like Pirates of the Caribbean sized movies talk about just the insane hours where you're like working 72 hours straight. And I'm like, it's just inhuman. It doesn't matter that you're in triple golden time and you're saving for your retirement at that point. You can't stand up. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your health. And no one short of Haskell Wexler, who should be a demigod to anyone listening to this podcast, made a documentary a few years before he passed away called Who Needs Sleep? And it was about the brutal hours and short turnaround times that are expected of people. And I think outside of the film industry, I think that there's this belief that it's sort of a first world problem, the working conditions on a movie set. But I'm here to tell you, the hours are long. Most people don't work more than an 8-hour day. 12-hour day is kind of where you start with a film shoot.
The injuries and death that occur on film sets absolutely should not occur. And the ones that are attributed to fatigue really, really shouldn't occur.
Accidents are going to happen. I understand. We're human beings. In the course of being alive, we're going to have accidents. Some of those accidents are going to be serious. And you can't stop people from having accidents. But
you know what? You can also not set up, a perfect storm for accidents in which you've kept someone, you've deprived someone of sleep for days on end, and then expect them to be able to just, even get themselves home after working so many hours. It's really, look, Haskell Wexler in his documentary, Who Needs Sleep, was calling for just a 12-hour day. So just 50% longer than the normal, 8-hour workday that in most people, not everyone.
And this is, by the way, again, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, to anyone who listens to this podcast, but it's physical work. You're carrying around heavy pieces of equipment. You're moving stuff into places that aren't meant to be moved into. As I complained about in my war story, when I was in the art department, I had to empty a hayloft one day and then fill another hayloft with that hay. It was like me and one or two other guys. It's just grueling physical work. And I'm not complaining about it. We all got into this for
for the glamour,
for the excitement. But I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with doing a lot of physical work, but I do think that asking someone to do extremely physical work for 16, 17 hours in a day, I feel like we've all been in a situation where you're working on a project, a film, or anything where you have to pull an all-nighter, or you have to, once in a while, you have to do one of those things. But it becomes so de rigueur in the film world and the TV world, and it really, to me, does kind of boil down to, especially when you're working in a factory setting like a TV series where it's like, it's the same crew, it's the same AD, it may not be the same director, but it's the same staff making episode after episode. If you're realizing the only way to get it done is to pull a 19-hour day every episode or every day, then somebody needs to alert. This is why unions exist, to make sure that people aren't being exploited in that way.
And here the solution in the past was like, oh, well, we're just going to make this so expensive that the producers and the studios won't ever do it. Guess what? There is no amount of money that is a deterrent, it seems like. Yeah,
you're not going to make, and I don't mean this in a specific way, but you're not going to make any studio, Universal, Disney, whatever, you're not going to hurt them by, a show going over budget. It's really like, there are days, and we've talked about it repeatedly, where like everything goes off the rails and stuff doesn't go right, and you have to stay there a little late to get the job done. And I think that literally everybody in this business understands that once in a while you might have to do that. But when it's an everyday thing, these people can't have lives. They can't go to the dentist. They can't do anything but just keep working, and the money is good, so you're just going to keep working to fill that bank account. But man, oh man, the cost.
Yeah, so Deadline did this article, basically, that once again, there's this call on the producers to fix this broken aspect of the industry, and it got signed on to by a bunch of great cinematographers, including many that have been on the show, friends of the show, people who are going to be on the show soon. We've already recorded episodes that may not have aired yet, but people like, Eric Messerschmidt and Paul Cameron and Ellen Curris and Donald A. Morgan and Mandy Walker and Robert Yeoman. So it's like there's a lot of like big names on that list there that of people who are saying like, enough is enough. This really,
those are all people who are working at the top of the game. And something that I learned from our mutual friend, the late great Neil Fredericks. Neil would work on these indie films where they would exploit the shit out of the crew all the time, and Neil, as the DP, was the one who would stop them. Neil would say, you can't treat my crew like that. Neil would say, you can't push lunch, we have to take a lunch. Like you've been working these guys all morning. And honestly, when I see that exploitation, I do think of Neil. It is a brave move on his part, because if you get a reputation as a DP that's super hostile to producers, you might not work.
Or difficult, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, who else is going to do that? If you're the second AC, and I distinctly remember, and actually this was my alternate war story that we didn't include, but it was a film that I worked on early in my career when I was a makeup artist. And one day the first AD came in, the first AD and the producer were best pals. And the first AD came in and she was laughing her face off. What was she laughing her face off about? Second AC, who was working for free, he was a university student who was working for free on this relatively low budget movie, had the audacity in her mind to ask for a second meal after he'd worked 14 hours. And he was living in Miami. He had driven himself at his own expense up to DeLand, Florida, which is a perfectly nice community, but it's a hike from Miami. He wasn't sleeping in his own bed. He was sleeping in this weird house that the production had rented, and he was sleeping like in a sleeping bag on the floor. Had the audacity to ask for a second meal, and she was like, when I was just starting out, it wouldn't occur to me. Ha 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 ha. And I have carried the disgust that I felt towards that AD with me all these years. It pisses me off when people exploit people. It's like our business, it tends towards exploitation. It tends towards asking people to work extra hard. But for God's sakes, like, people got to sleep, people got to eat, and everyone's got a different metabolism and needs more sleep or less sleep. And you kind of have to act like, hey, everyone needs, a good 8 hours and needs to have a fucking life. It's really, I support these DPs and what they're doing.
In France, they all think we're crazy. They have much more sane hours that are much more like a traditional standard banker's hours. And it'll take more days, which means more money for the cost of filmmaking. But Lord knows, there used to be all kinds of blames like, oh, talent needs to have this, or, we need to be able to fit these certain number of jobs into a certain number of schedules, or there's no other way to do it. Clearly, that's not true. And clearly now, in this realm of peak TV where there's never been more stuff to watch, Absolutely. It's going to cost more, but people need to work. People need 8 hours on, 8 hours off, and 8 hours for whatever the hell they want. And the idea of having 0 hours for whatever the hell you want is not acceptable. So, people who work in this industry actually need to have some semblance of life. And I'm really glad that a bunch of DPs stood up and said something about it. And I think that there might be a strike. I mean, I think if producers aren't willing to bend on this, and it would be a really bad time for a strike in the industry because it's so busy. But I mean, I think it's time. If they're not going to do it now, then when? There's a video in the Deadline article from several years ago that you can watch. It's 10 minutes long, but if you really want to explore, get deep down into this, we'll find a link in the show notes to the documentary Who Needs Sleep. It's totally worth watching. It's a great documentary.
Do you know if IATSE's ever gone on strike? I actually don't know if they actually have.
Yes, there's been a couple of different strikes. And,
I know the WGA's gone on strike, SAG's gone on strike, DGA never gone on strike.
Well, I do know that certain guilds have struck certain productions and companies and things like that, because I know I picket lined once or twice when I was in the guild. So, But you know what? I don't remember if there was a nationwide strike. That's a good question. I actually have to research that. I wasn't in the guild all that many years, so there wasn't a full strike when I was there. So,
anyway, well, let's go on with the interview.
Yeah, let's get to the interview with Mark Doering-Powell.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
So I am here today with Mark Doering-Powell, DP currently of Grownish, but like tons of single camera comedy projects and just an enormous resume. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So we're kind of here first to talk about Grownish, which you've shot, according to IMDb, you've shot 43 episodes of Grownish. And it just seems, I mean, it's just such a prolific amount. But can you talk a little bit about like how you came to work on Grownish and how you went about kind of building the look for Grownish?
Yeah, I'd worked with Michael Peacock, the producer, on a Hulu project in 2014. And then we were on different gigs. I was in Atlanta on a show and came back here. And this opportunity came up after season 1, which Paula Hudobro shot season 1, the first 13 episodes.
Oh, yeah.
And this series was, Kenny Barris's spin-off from Blackish. And they had sort of, I guess, based the look on, or just were inspired by Submarine. I don't know if you've seen that. Sort of a coming-of-age story. And, of course, the show doesn't look like that one, but that was sort of the jumping-off point. Mm-hmm. When I came on, I watched the first season, and I also saw the scripts that were coming up in season 2. And I knew that the show would have to grow, right? And you just see that there were more storylines and very relatable characters and so on. That and sort of you could maybe even take an anthology approach to some of the episodes. There were just some very serious topics that they were tackling, and so it required more than just going in with sort of one look. And it depended on, and I decided to sort of base it on characters and on the spaces that they inhabit.
Now, I've never worked on or near any show like that, and correct me if I'm getting any of the nomenclature wrong, but it's, they're 30-minute comedies, but they're single camera. And like, how is that different from other TV? I always wonder if your schedules are tighter, or like how do you have the same amount of time that a sitcom that was shot, in one location in front of a live audience would have to prepare and shoot? Or how does it work? What are the mechanics of it?
Yeah, so a single camera half-hour comedy, it has more time technically than a multi-camera sitcom that has, a bunch of pet cameras that are maybe they're rehearsing one day and shooting one day. Roughly, that's usually the arrangement, broadly speaking. There's different ways that those are approached too. So normally this type of show would have about 5 days. 1 week, 5 days of work would deliver about a half hour of television, which is actually about 22 minutes of television, of story. And we have 4 days, pretty much, 4 to 4.5. So we have a little less, which makes it challenging. So in that regard, it is a little tricky. You're definitely always in prep shoot mode. Like you have a moment between takes, and invariably half of those are filled with turning to your key grip and gaffer, and you're working something out for the next week or two that's coming up.
So you shoot an episode in 4 days, and then the next week you shoot another episode in 4 days. You don't have like a week down to prep and then another 4 days.
Yeah, there's no break. Now, normally what we do is you do a block of 2 episodes. So one director will do a block of 2, which makes it a little more efficient. So you can, let's say you have a half a day on one episode that could be on this location. You try to build another half day in at that location, try to avoid your company moves. So there is that efficiency that's built in a little bit. But for example, the episode that I was nominated for was one 4-day episode by itself that Jenny Rice Kenzik Henry directed. And those are hard because you get into that 4-day block of just shooting that, and you're already prepping the next block, and you've been prepping the next block even before that. So it's a little odd. You have to just sort of be at peace with the fact that it's a little chaotic, and you just gotta kind of like just keeping it together and just chiseling away at the tasks that you have to be prepared for the next one.
Are there any, I hate to say tricks or tips, but like any ways that you kind of keep that stuff organized and keep the communication flowing that smooth that? Because it just sounds like just such an amazing workload. And also, you know, like if you're in the middle of shooting an episode and you make a choice that the next episode hinges on or something, and you get there and it wasn't a good idea, you're screwed. So like, how do you database everything, I guess is my real question.
Yeah. Most of it is in person. I'll start with the stuff that's not. Like I used to be voicemail, but then I moved on to WhatsApp, and eventually moved on to Slack with being able to communicate with post. So being able to leave a message for the dailies colorist, for example, because they're on different schedules than we are. You know, like your dailies colorist, they're transferring stuff at night. But I may want to leave him a quick message. So I have some way to actually do that while I'm driving home or driving to work. So I try to do certain things like that, like be able to use my certain things during the time that I can normally not do anything else, like I'm driving. And that's been very useful. I try to stay in touch with post. I'm really good about that. And Slack, I think, is pretty useful if it's used right. I think Slack is more about like not abusing people's weekend time. Like people can turn that off and not have a ding. That's how it should be used. You shouldn't use it to commandeer people's time more. Email can do that enough.
I've been using it wrong all these years. Seriously.
Yeah,
I would find myself in like 4 different Slack teams, and like it was just dinging constantly, and I eventually just turned off all of the alerts.
Right. And that's the beauty of it. Like you should turn it off, and that's why I did kind of like that. So those things do help a little bit with the departments that you're not around, being remotely, and this is before COVID too, right? Like that's a really useful thing to have. I'm always amazed when I hear when people are not in touch with post or their dailies, and I think that's a mistake. I think I might not talk to my dailies colorist for 2 months, but something might come up. I might just want to let them know that we shot a lot of 48 frames, but most of it's going to play at 24. But we just want to shoot 48 to have. And then if there's if I know it's going to be, I've talked to the director and I know it's going to be mostly 24, I can save them the work of doing it twice. They might just go ahead and do all their 24 frame sync work and just save the 48. If I know that there's going to be a lot of back and forth between slow-mo and sync sound, I won't say anything and they'll transfer both. But if I can save them the work, I will. Other than that, it is really just, face-to-face communication on set with your best boys, your key grip. Paul Schmidt is our key grip. Jay Yowler's been my gaffer since 2014. He's amazing. So it's just constantly just being in touch with people. There's just no avoiding that.
Something that caught my eye, I mean, it's been a while since kind of single camera 30-minute series has become more commonplace. They've been around forever, but I would say it was the early aughts when you had shows like My Name is Earl or Malcolm in the Middle kind of started the trend of doing these kinds of shows. And one of the things that impresses me about them and impresses me about your work is, as opposed to a sitcom, a 3-camera, 4-camera sitcom, which is its own entire challenge, but it's the need to make these shows kind of cinematic. And, when you're describing, you're saying you're doing, probably about 5 pages a day, which is, not insane, but a lot, especially when you watch any of the shows that you work on and you see like the amount of precision camera work or, like using the camera as a character. I guess that's sort of the question I'm kind of orbiting around here is like, how do you find in a tight schedule like that, how do you make the play to make the camera kind of a character in the show itself?
That's really challenging. How do you make these fast schedules, these really short schedules, sing? And I think the way to approach it is just try to be a filmmaker. Try to tell the story with the filmmaking. Sometimes that means just staying out of the way a little bit and hanging back and picking the right lenses and picking the right viewpoint. But if you can go in with some really strong basic ideas, like who is this scene being told from? What point of view? Go in with a point of view. That helps. And this helps. I find it helps directors too, because I just ask them like, well, who's this? Are we telling this from, is this Zoe's POV? Because she's not really in this. She's going to narrate on this later. She's going to have a voiceover on this, but this is really from Aaron's point of view, and then we can find an approach that works a little better. It's very simple things like that just help you find a way, and they'll save you work because you're not covering every doorknob and everything in the room. You can really consolidate a little bit on what you're going to do and tell the story better. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of scenes when there's, you're doing 4 or 5 pages with 6 or 7 cast members, and you're going to have to do close-ups on most of them, and those are really hard, and we might even bring in 3 cameras for that and cross-shoot a little bit. But for the most part, I think being allowed to be a filmmaker helps. Because I give you an example, like sometimes we do swingles, right? We want to swing back and forth between some lines, and there's a very quick way you can do that.
I've never heard that term before. I'm totally going to use that. That's a great term.
Yeah, we do. It's sort of a little signature that we do now and then. Like every now and then we have a scene where we swing back and forth, and there's a down and dirty way you can do it. Just sort of zoom in and do some of those, but they're just not good. And early on, I knew I'd have to just move the camera in tighter, just 2-3 feet away and swing back and forth. And I did one of those in Luca's first dorm room, and they loved it. And I remember that was the first time when I knew I knew which direction to take, because I was like, oh, they like that? Good. There's a couple other things we might be able to do that they might like, So, but you have to see what they have an appetite for, because you have to say hey, I'm not just going to zoom in. Just give me literally give me 2 minutes to move the camera in, and then we'll be ready. And it's literally that, and you have to fight for those 2 minutes sometimes, So
yeah. Well, let's talk about how you got your start. What was the moment that made you decide to pursue cinematography as a career?
Well, I went to art school in Brooklyn, New York. And I was in for painting and graphic design my first year, and I discovered a film department in the basement of the gym. And there was also a computer graphics department that was just, at the time, phenomenal and way ahead of its time. Tiny little department that was down there with the film department. And I found this, just people were working on all this cool stuff down there, and I just immediately changed my major.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so sophomore year on, I majored in film. And that's kind of where I knew that would be that would be my future. That's just much more of what I wanted to do. I graduated school and I worked as a Photosonics tech in New York on commercials.
What is Photosonics? I'm unfamiliar with Photosonics.
I'm sorry. So Photosonics, it's a slow motion camera. So at the time, you had 2 cameras basically. You had 2 35mm cameras. One could shoot 360 frames a second, pin registered, rock steady, and the other one could go up to 2,500 frames a second on a drum. The film would never stop. It had a rotating prism that would paint the image as it moved past the gate. Yeah, it was really cool. So that was really fun. I mean, I worked on huge release Scott commercials that were on JFK Airport, and just all the big commercials. Everybody was shooting some slow motion somewhere. It was a thing back in the late 80s and early 90s.
I've heard stories about those cameras, if they had the slightest jam or if the sprocket didn't catch properly, that they would immediately have to stop everything, and the camera itself that would just be jammed full of 35mm film.
That's exactly right. I had surgeon's forceps that clamped down really tight, and you just open the door and just literally pull, and you just had film chips flying over your shoulder. It looked insane. And there was oil. You had to lubricate the movement a lot. There's a lot of oil in there. There's literally the bottom of the camera would fill up with a 1/4 inch of oil as you rolled for maybe half an hour. And you would think this is crazy. You're squirting oil all over the film and everything, but it all comes off in the wash. It's never an issue. But when people see that, especially camera assistants who do it for the first time, they're just you're insane. What do you mean? This is not going to work, The ones that have done Photosonics are, of course, it's awesome. Let's get the shot. So that's kind of how I started. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it's like being on a pit crew for a Formula One race car. It's just an awesome piece of machinery, But when I moved out here, I had to find work as a camera assistant. So I went down to Corman's. What a weird and wonderful place. What a weird lumberyard stages.
I've heard so much about the lumberyard.
Yeah, that's what it was. There was a lumberyard on Main Street, not that big. Gold's Gym was next door. You had these little tiny stages that could barely do a couple of bedroom sets, maybe. Editing was there. You had the flatbeds were across the way over where the construction was, and they were shooting a film a month. So I remember when I was a camera assistant, I remember going from one film to another. And you had maybe just a couple of days before you start shooting the next one.
Wow. And who were some of the DPs that you were working with back then? I mean, like, that's when some humongous, legendary, Oscar-winning DPs were going through there.
Mark Perry. Mark Perry was the one who shot Fantastic Four. So Mark Perry was, now he, I believe, ended up teaching film in Florida. But his stuff was amazing, I gotta say. And he ended up shooting Fantastic Four. I only worked on it for a couple of days. I day played on it when they were shooting up in the Santa Susana Mountains.
But that is such a legendarily weird project to have worked on at all. I mean, for our listeners who haven't heard of it, there's actually a documentary, I want to say on Amazon Prime, about the making of it. But it was like somebody was trying to keep the rights to the Fantastic Four, but a movie had to be made in a certain period of time, so they got Corman to make one. So there's a full feature that has never been released, although I think there are bootlegs that you can find out there, of the Fantastic Four made in the mid-90s. And everyone working on it thought they were, and this is before making a big Marvel movie was a big deal. But it's just, you can find pictures of it, and it's like such an ambitious, it's possibly the most ambitious, crazy low-budget movie ever made.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if any of us thought that it was going to be the next best thing coming out, but we certainly tried. I do remember Stretch being a 2x4, with an arm going long, with a 2x4 stretched out, through a long sleeve. And this just so horrible. Like, what else did you have, right? You didn't have any money, It's pretty bizarre that we were shooting basically a fake movie, right? Like, we were just doing it.
And you made a whole movie. I mean, that's the thing. Like, a whole movie, cast, shot, edited, put together. They had a premiere screening of it, and like everyone was like, "Hey, look at us, we're the Fantastic Four." And then the movie was intentionally shelved because it only ever existed to like hold on to the rights. They had to make a movie, not release a movie within a certain period of time.
And you had to be, the Bond company or whatever, whoever the financiers. You had to be convincing. You couldn't just, oh yeah, we're making a movie and we got a home. Like, no, you had to really be convincing, I guess, to do this, I suppose, because why else would they spend even any money to do it? So it's funny. There are some people who are trying to dig up more information on that and write a book or whatever, because it is such a bizarre story, but it was pretty much buried rather successfully. And, all you have is a couple of people talking about it, it's pretty bizarre.
I even remember in the mid-90s, there was a magazine, I mean, the organization still exists, there was a magazine called Film Threat, and the Fantastic Four was on the cover. Like, they were expecting the movie to come out. So I'm curious, why did you pursue being a cinematographer as opposed to staying in the camera department where you can have a pretty fine career moving up the ranks, from AC to operator, and lots of people do. When did the bug bite you that you wanted specifically to be a cinematographer?
Well, I think the issue with me is that I was always shooting while I was an assistant and while I was operating, because I just wanted to hone my skills and build a reel. And I had some contacts from film school. Like when I first moved out here, in the first year I was already flying back, and I did a PSA with a friend of mine in Brooklyn, and it actually won a Silver Clio award.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was really cool. And so I was always just trying to get better at shooting, because eventually either somebody sends you off to shoot some second unit or some inserts, or you have to just shoot. You have to eventually get a camera in your hand, start lighting, going to dailies, seeing what works, what doesn't work. Did you overlight it? How dark can you go? Remember, we're shooting film back then, so everything was really getting a feel for the lab and the film stock, and you're shooting dark scenes sometimes. Like, how do you get that spot meter out? Like, how dark can you go? And, when is it too far? So that's kind of the thing you have to practice. And I think for me, I was actually operating and assisting. I worked on NYPD Blue, had a great time on that. I did operate on a couple of TV shows where I got brought in as like an additional operator, and they kept calling me. But then I was called by the director then to shoot some 18, 20-day wonder, and then I would do that, because back in that time, you were DP operating.
Yeah. And primarily, it seems like what you're doing now is television. You did do one feature that I want to say was one of the early HD features called Seeing Other People that you shot. I want to say that was one of the first like non-Star Wars theatrically released HD features. Can you talk a little bit about kind of embracing HD at an earlier time, or shooting digitally, as I guess we would say today, as opposed to shooting film?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about Seeing Other People. It was a labor of love for Gavin Polone and Wally Wolodorsky, who directed that. They put their own money into it. And originally they wanted to shoot it. Dan Kaplan was a producer I worked with a couple of times before and after that. And, originally they're like, oh, let's just shoot on a VX1000, which is like this horrible little prosumer camera. And
Yeah,
right
I remember it
away,
well.
right. And right away, I'm doing the math on like, oh my, I gotta convince them to not do that, right? So I went to Panavision.
Good job. Good job. That would have been a totally different movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. It's such a, that is actually a good example again of, try to be a filmmaker. Meaning, when do you do a comedy that's done 2:3:5, widescreen? At the time, that was not something that you saw very often. And we're mostly in these tiny little interiors. But I did have scenes with more people in them, and I really thought I could make use of the wider frame. So that was awesome. That was one way I actually sold it too. Like I said, look, if we do it with the F900, we have enough resolution that we can actually afford to crop away a little bit and deliver this cool widescreen thing. And they were totally on board with it, so great. And the other thing that happened when you did that is the first day we're shooting in an interior, and we do a nice little wide shot of just them sitting there talking. And the set decorators coming by, and they're looking at the monitor, and they start dressing the frame. They're putting some mail, some envelopes over here, and some keys, and you're dressing the frame. And because it's just an interesting frame. And so automatically it elevated the work. Like everybody just started making this frame better. And that was the first time I realized that. It was really kind of a pleasant surprise. So we're in a much better place now, right? Like you can get an Alexa Mini and some Leicas, and you can just do marvelous work. Like now we just have so many options. And it was hard back then. You had to do a lot of tests. You had to do your homework. You had to go all the way through post. It was the unknown. It was especially going to theatrical. There was, do you shoot Rec 709? Do you do this 7240 thing that nobody knew about? What is that? What's the color space?
Yeah.
Nobody knew what they were doing, really.
Yeah, there wasn't a proven workflow, and actually, I never really thought about it till you just brought it up. But like pre that, you'd have like one video assist or whatever. You'd have one video tap monitor, and people couldn't really see. It wasn't what you see is what you get. You'd still have to use your imagination a little bit, no matter how some of them were very good, but you're still kind of looking at a ground glass with basically a lipstick camera that's kind of going in there. So like it must have been. It was interesting to hear you talk about how like suddenly people are seeing the frame. Like this is the shot, and these days that's all anyone gets, and you can have any number of monitors, so it's not special. But was that an adjustment for you? Did you have to like now everyone can sort of see your work in progress at every stage exactly what it's going to look like? Did that change how you worked?
Yeah, it is the definite reality. Like the monitors are sort of the opiate of HD, right? Like everybody loves that monitor, and now we have such great. It's so much easier now. You don't have a big heavy CRT monitor you're dragging around. The OLEDs are so fantastic, and you're right. Like I would love to have a DIT on every job that I do. Like for example, on Grownish, I don't have a DIT. I have my own pre-made LUTs that I've made that I have in LUT boxes that I can toggle through that I might apply, and I'm kind of I'm thankful on Grownish, for example, where they trust me, and I don't have the exact look necessarily to every scene that we might do, but I'll put the closest LUT on there that might get us there, and they trust me. I can say to them, oh, on this one I'm just gonna desat this even more, but this will take us halfway there, and I just love having that trust. And then when it comes back in the final color, now they know not to get used to the dailies version. The dailies version is often very close because they're using our LUT that we have to apply to dailies. Mm-hmm. And so the version that you see on the Avid and so on is often very, very close to what we deliver. But every now and then, the colorist, Gareth Cook, over at the Foundation, we work very closely together, and we will throw some color frames back and forth that we'll experiment with, just some still frames that we might have beforehand. And we work very hard on the color.
Let me just jump in here real quick because you're kind of treading into some fertile territory that we try not to get too technical in the show, but of course tech is very much part of this business and this industry, and you can't separate it. I was working at Wexler when Everybody Hates Chris was just going into production in the early days. I know that the camera package came from there, and there was sort of a ridiculous tower of GAC that came along with it. There was all of the early sorts of, I want to say, headaches that went along with HD production, including like audio delay, and there was Evertz boxes and a ton of equipment that went out on your show. Can you compare a little bit, just I would say maybe between Everybody Hates Chris which would be probably the very sort of like early days of HD production for television in sort of a non-live, 2-tape edited show, and then like Just Add Magic, which I have to say is an incredible look, super high-end, high production value look. There's just really, it looks fantastic. And then a show like Grownish, where now no DIT, and it sounds like you're very much more minimalistic compared to sort of this, maybe the stuff that's come before. Can you talk about just sort of the progression of shooting television and these formats and how your work has changed over time?
That's a great question, because that kind of defines the direction I've taken, because I've consciously taken the direction to simplify. It's crazy when you think back on it. It really is. Let me give you an example of how messed up things were at that time. Just one challenge I'll give you, a very critical challenge that hurt me twice on 2 HD shows. The first one was on Family Affair. The DIT had only done multi-camera. This was the aptitude came from multi-camera, right? So he came in and he's like, look, you got to do everything tri-level sync. All the cameras have to be on a live switcher and they have to be clocked exactly right. And I was like, all right, fine, I don't care. But then when he started telling me what the ramifications of that were, I was like, wait, what are you saying here? And they were like, well, when the editor starts cutting on the Avid, if they cut to a frame that's not in sync, it'll jump. And I said, hang on. Look, I get it. I think you're a little confused between a live switcher in multi-camera and an Avid when somebody's editing, because there is no jump. Because if I had 3 film cameras here, they're not tri-level synced. We just start rolling. They're not frame accurate to one another. When one shutter is open over here, this one's closed, and nobody cares. And he couldn't wrap his head around that, because all he knew was multi-camera. Those were the only DITs that were around in 2001.
Wow.
So what that meant, though, because he had tri-level sync going, I didn't want to step on his toes. I let him do his thing. Well, what it meant, though, is if you had a loose cable, you could totally, if you're doing a handheld shot and that cable lost sync for one frame, you would scramble your take for 2 or 3 frames. And you wouldn't know it till the next day, because you just do like a date check where you do a record review of your last 5 seconds. So, and then that indeed happened to us. And then I just came in, I was like, all right, just unplug. We had a loom of cable. I was like, unplug all the tri-level sync. And he was still like, he went to the producers and he's telling him, Mark's going to mess up the whole thing. You won't be able to edit it. And I just was like, no, I'm not going to mess anything up. Look, let's just roll. We did like a quick test. Look, go send this in. See if you can edit it. And because nobody knew. It's not his fault either. Nobody really knew. And what informed me was my film experience, right? Because the Avid doesn't need to have every frame synchronized. Because,
of course.
Right. That's just one of the many dark days of HD that we dealt with back then.
Workaholics has a very, very particular look, and I know you're not credited as cinematographer, but I happened to be watching an episode and I saw your name on the slate right when Anders is doing a wrap to camera, and so it made me suspect that maybe you shot you did some DP work or some units or something for that. Can you talk about the experience of camera operating on a mostly handheld, and I'm guessing lower budget Comedy Central sort of series? Can you talk a little bit about that experience and working in what I'm assuming is also a really quick schedule, but and I could be wrong. Maybe it's not a quick schedule, but it feels like it's kind of got that low budget indie vibe, and that's part of its charm. So I don't know, tell us a little bit about Workaholics.
You're absolutely right. Workaholics was so much fun. I did the first season. So I DP'd the first season. It's 2 cameras. I shot that actually on the precursor of the Varicam, on the ENG version, the 3700, which nobody used. And somehow I ended up picking that one. There was a couple of reasons. They actually went to a C300 in the second season. We wanted to go to the C300, but there were some things that weren't quite ready yet with the way that we were doing post and our workflow. Yeah, and I operated most of the 8-camera shots. There was a lot. Half of it was handheld. The story was that in the office, it was sort of like very like sort of boring. Like, this place sucks. Everything's sort of locked off and very flat lighting, fluorescent lighting. And then everything else was sort of handheld and had energy to it. And I had so much fun on that. I mean, we would talk about how we had to control our breathing because it just those guys would ad lib, and it was hard not to laugh because you you're kind of close to them and you don't want to ruin the soundtrack. And I had a hard time with that. So it was hard. It was a lot of fun. And that was another 4-day episode. We would prep on Mondays. Mondays was spent prepping that week again, making sure that everything was, all your ducks were in a row for that week. And you would also look ahead to the next episode. You might scout some locations and so on. So we would prep Monday and shoot Tuesday through Friday. And that worked really, really well.
I know you say that your shows look different, and they do, but I'll tell you that you make people look really good. I mean, I think you really achieved the goal. Like, your leading cast all look gorgeous, and I know that has it helps that they're already attractive to start with. But when you add really incredible lighting with that, then it just takes it to the next level. And I'm not going to ask you to reveal your secret sauce of filters or lighting or anything like that here. But do you have some sort of playbook? Okay, fine. Ben will ask you. Do you have some sort of playbook that you like to do when you want to make people look their best and in this style of shooting, and you get to work in some hard light too for fun? Or what's your approach to the hard light?
Good question. There's not one formula to that. I do like splashing hard light into a set and having it react with the set, or even off the wardrobe when it works. You can get in trouble with that too if you have it bounce too low of somebody in front of them and you get too much of an underlight on somebody. It can not look great. But just right, it can look really nice and rappy, right? Like, you're actually using the desk that they're sitting at or the person next to them to sort of bounce some light off of them. That's one thing that we do sometimes, which is just more interesting and actually can be more flattering because it's really close to them and rappy to create a pleasing light rather than putting a softbank there, which can't be there because it's in the shot, right? So in some ways, I do light the space, but I learned early on, Lowell Peterson told me early on, light the people, You got to also light the people, which you sort of know, right? That's what DPs have been doing for decades, right? But you can light the space. A lot of times, some projects let you do that, where you can do a developing master. Somebody walks in and you're Steadicaming along with them, and you do a couple different sizes. Then you swing around, you shoot this way, and you can get done very quickly. But there are either tricks you have to use to make sure that they're standing where that will look good on them, so that the sunlight that's hitting over here will create a nice key. Where they end up, and how to augment that from something that you have up higher if you need to. Again, this is like the fun of it, right? Like, I just enjoy doing that. And I have a great gaffer, Jay Yowler, who doesn't shy away from that. He's like just the best at that stuff. He is such a mad scientist when it comes to stuff like that. He's great at either putting little quasar tubes with pool noodles on them, hiding them somewhere to help augment that, or he's bouncing light off of something. We have a good shorthand where I'll say, like, I know that desk is on fire, but I'm going to put a window there to get that clipping back. There's enough there in the log that I can like massage that back, because it won't look right while we're shooting it sometimes, but in the end, I know I can make that right. So that kind of like interactive lighting is really fun to do. But again, it's like where lighting the space meets lighting the people, and that's a fun intersection to arrive at. Because sometimes you can do both and end up lighting the people very interestingly, very flattering. Light can be done that way. So yeah, I'll use hard light when I can, but I've been just as guilty of using soft smart side keys, and because they work and it's like a really classic Hollywood style, and why not? It's really flattering. It's good, the best modeling. I draw upon a lot of that whenever it works for the scene.
Thank you so much for coming on. Before we go, is there any place where people can see your work other than like all television that has been made in the last 10, 15 years?
You can go to my website, markdoering-powell.com, and I've got a couple of clips on there. And most recently, Grownish, the fourth season is still showing now. Their new episodes are dropping every week. And you can see that on Freeform and Hulu the following week.
And let me just jump in real quick here and also say congratulations again on your third Emmy nomination for Grownish. And also, it is the #1 show for the Freeform Network, I think, for a long time running now. So it's very, very successful, and I think if I read correctly, it is the #1 rated comedy program on cable for women 18 to 49. So, boom.
Whoa.
That's a huge demographic, and those are great numbers. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a great team there. It's a wonderful show. I'm lucky to be there. It's such a great show to work on, and it's a wonderful show. And they take on some very tough, uncomfortable topics, which is why I think it resonates with its audience.
Congratulations again, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so that was Mark Doering-Powell. Hey, thanks so much for being on the show, Mark. It was great to chat, and we'll have to do it again.
I thought that was an unbelievably enlightening interview. It was so interesting to delve into how he does everything he does, and also just to hear. I know it's not actionable to someone who's like starting out, and we try to stay away from getting into too much tech. But I love hearing the history of how he moved from film to HD and how HD has simplified since then into our current digital world that it is now.
Yeah, I agree. That was fun. Hey, Ben, guess what time it is?
It says it's 10:04 p.m. on my computer.
It is time to pay the bills. It is actually time for us to do a shout out to a new sponsor of the show.
What?
Yep.
New sponsor?
New sponsor is a company called DZO Film. DZO Film makes some really interesting lenses, and they make them in cinema style. So they're available in PL mount and also the alternative mount out there that some people like, which is EF mount. And I want to talk about, very briefly here, the Vespid Primes, which is a brand new set of Cinema Prime lenses, and they're just sort of making their way out into the world right now. But unlike a lot of other companies, they have emerged from the womb fully formed with a 7-lens set, including a macro lens. And you can also choose not to get the macro if you don't want to, but it's a really great lens. And I have to say that what makes these lenses, and the price is going up a little bit here, but they're just over $1,000 per lens. And for a cinema lens, I know, for a cinema lens, that is extremely, especially a PL mount cinema lens, really unlikely, because most consumer lenses are of any quality are more expensive than that. And
yeah, that's an amazing price.
And they did a really good job at minimizing the things you don't want, like breathing. Like these lenses, when you focus, the image size doesn't change. They're really, really well controlled. They're controlled to the same level of lenses that cost way, way, way more than these. It's deeply impressive what they've been able to do, especially at such a low price. We stock them at Hot Red Cameras. If you would like to check them out, we keep demo sets there so people can come play with it. We also have a really cool little video on our Hot Red Cameras YouTube channel, which we do a comparison between all the sort of top entry-level cinema lenses in the market, including these DZO Vespids, and you should totally check them out. If you were looking at small, inexpensive cinema lenses, of which these definitely are, they're smaller than a can of Coke. They have 80mm fronts, and in PL mount in particular, they're an incredible value, and anyone who's looking in sort of like that less expensive or converting sort of still lenses to use for cinema, they should absolutely give these a shot because they're amazing. They're really impressive.
I'm excited to see that. And also, you kind of dropped in there, but we're getting way more involved in our YouTube channel. So there's all kinds of new stuff to see on our YouTube channel, including that.
Yes, that is technically on the Hot Red Cameras YouTube channel, but it is our sister channel, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. So if you go to Cam Noir and look up this episode, you'll see links to all the cool stuff, including DZO, so you can see what we're talking about.
Excellent.
And now, short ends.
All right, Ben, so it is time for our famed short end portion of the show. What is your obsession this week?
This is just something I'm extremely excited to see, and as information comes out, I'll probably be talking about it more. But we all know the Coen brothers. We all love the Coen brothers. They're an institution. They make amazing movies.
I'm kidding. I think I've mentioned on the show many times that Miller's Crossing is my favorite movie. So
yeah, certainly in my top 5 ever. So for the first time ever, those guys have been working together since the 1980s. For the first time since the 1980s, there's a new Joel Coen movie coming out, but Ethan was elsewhere's the whole time.
Ethan said, "You're on your own, kid. I'm not doing this."
And moreover, it is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
Oh.
Called The Tragedy of Macbeth, which is actually, I believe that's the full title for the Shakespeare play. And it stars Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. I'm presuming, I don't know, maybe they've gender swapped it and Frances McDormand is Macbeth and Denzel is playing Lady Macbeth. I don't know. It's shot by Bruno Debonel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
Fantastic.
He's one of the best. He's an amazing cinematographer. I've loved his work for years, although apparently I've never said his name out loud, but that's how a lot of it goes. And it is closing BFI Fest. So it's finished. I think they were shut down in the middle of the pandemic, I was reading, because I've been sort of following this for, I don't know, the last year or so. I mean, this is the stupid, hacky thought that comes to my head immediately, which is, I wonder which one's the talented one? Is it going to feel like a Coen Brothers movie without Ethan? Are we going to be like, oh, Joel had the mojo the whole time? Are they going to reunite and make another movie after this? I don't know. They certainly don't owe us any movies. They've made so many great movies, but I'm just fascinated. Oh, and also I believe the movie is in black and white. That's it. Wouldn't be the first time. There's always The Man Who Wasn't There, which they made in black and white. But it is the first Joel Coen solo directed effort. Even though if you look back at their movies, I think pre-Intolerable Cruelty, Ethan Coen was always credited as producer and Joel as director, but they both have been very open about the fact that both of them directed all the movies they co-directed. So it's just going to be interesting to see. And interesting also, Joel Coen isn't necessarily someone who seeks out the microphone and wants to talk about his work all that much, but it'll be interesting if he does, or to read articles about it in American Cinematographer or wherever, about like what it was like when it was just Joel Coen. I'm fascinated by this on 100 levels. A good Shakespeare adaptation is rare, but there are some great Shakespeare adaptations. I think it would be phenomenal just to watch Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, do the Shakespeare dialogue. I can't wait to see what it is. So that's my obsession.
Nice. It sounds really cool.
What is yours?
We've talked about it on the show. You're probably aware that Blackmagic released a 12K camera, usurping and surpassing all the other, relatively affordable, commercially available digital cinema cameras out there. They have this 12K camera. Well, it was $10,000 up until 2 days ago, 3 days ago, 4 days ago now maybe, and where they suddenly almost half the price down to $59.95. So they chopped off basically $4,000 off the price.
Basically $500 per K.
That sounds about right. Yes, exactly. $500 per K. If you want to look at it that way, it's a very competent, very capable camera. And its number one claim to fame is this ridiculous amount of resolution that it has. It's a Super 35 sensor. It's built sort of on the same sort of platform as their previous camera. Now, when they've done this in the past, it was usually the sort of telltale sign that they have something new brewing. And of course, NAB got pushed to another time this year. And it wouldn't surprise me if they announce something new, because that's a pretty major, drastic price change. Mm-hmm. And it's always very interesting to see what Blackmagic does next. They're not a boring company, even when they...
Never boring. I'll give them that.
When they fail spectacularally, and
if
it's
you
really
say
not
that,
boring.
Kays is going to call you up and yell at you. He loves Blackmagic.
You know what? He should love Blackmagic. They make great stuff. They make, DaVinci Resolve is incredible. Their pocket cameras are incredible. They make really, really good stuff, and they do deserve a lot of praise. Their flagship camera, to have that kind of price reduction, one, it might be trying to goose it to sell. That's what they did with the original pocket camera when they dropped it from $995 to $495. And of course, they blew them all out immediately. Maybe something like that's going to happen here. But I don't know. Maybe
are they about to unveil a 24K camera?
I don't know about that. I do know about quite a few sort of new up and coming cameras and things out there from other manufacturers, but Blackmagic is sort of a black hole for me. They keep their cards really close to their vest. They really don't tell a lot of people what they're working on. I get little inklings here and there, but of this one, I got nothing. So I don't know what they're planning. Maybe it was just a price change and we don't have anything to concern ourselves more than that. But usually when they do something like that, well, they're kind of working on something else. And for this camera to go with that kind of pricing in such a short period of time since it debuted makes me feel like they got a trick up their sleeve that we haven't seen yet. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to happen.
I've never tested the 12K camera. I've never really looked at it that much. And so I'm kind of blown away with curiousness about so they're getting that kind of resolution out, but at the expense of what? Or at the expense of nothing. How can they afford to make a camera that's that much higher resolution than any other camera on the market by much more established companies like Arri, Sony, Red, whatever. Red has an 8K camera and has for a while, so maybe 12K isn't that much more insane, but I just wonder what the advantage of that is. I'm not trying to negate it in any way, but I always feel like, most films are not going to master at higher than 4K resolution. So to have something that insane is to reframe later or to punch in or something. Are you going to punch in, 3 times into 4K resolution?
Certainly you can, and it does make some very good looking images. Is it a camera that is so head and shoulders above everything else out there that everyone should stop using their other camera and pay attention to it. No, I mean, it's not a perfect camera. There are no perfect cameras, but if you are obsessed with resolution, and there are a few people out there who are, or who really do have to do these type of things where they have one camera angle and everything is a punch-in or a reframe, it's a pretty darn good way to go. So,
I'm not bagging on Blackmagic. It's just like 12K when I first heard that. I'm like, that just sounds excessive. Decadent even.
And there's some good footage online that people can watch from this camera. Is it perfect? No, but it's really impressive, and now at a bargain price. So I'm sure I've got a pretty good idea.
5,000 to me, like that's almost if you're
6,000.
If you're not, well, yeah, 5,000-6,000 is about the place where I'm like, any more than that, you should rent it if you're not running a company that's making a living on your camera.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, look, we can get into the rent versus own debate all day long. Having worked in both those capacities, I have a pretty good idea of what use cases would make sense for renting versus purchasing. I can tell you that you should buy the $150,000 camera if that is appropriate, mostly for what you're doing.
Oh, of course,
make your money back.
If you have a business that can sustain it, I just think that most people don't have a business. Like, I think there's like a lot of people who want to have a camera that they can go make small industrial films or that they can work with. And it's not going to take you years and years to make your money back on a $5,000 camera. But if you buy a $50,000 camera, it's a different situation.
Yeah, you're doing an entirely different quantity or level of work and everything else. But I will tell you, Blackmagic makes some really good cameras. And it just so happens that they make one camera that is more resolute than all the others. And it just had a huge price drop.
More resolute. The resolute camera.
It is. It's extremely resolute.
So we'll all just be sitting here biting our fingernails waiting to find out if Blackmagic's about to release their 50K camera for
something tells
10K.
Me they're not, but it wouldn't
surprise me. If they released a 50K camera for $10,000, that would still be $500 per K. And that sticks to my theory.
All right, so Ben, I think that just about does our short ends this week. Where can people find you if they want to get more Ben Rock in their life?
I mean, and who wouldn't want that? You should go to benrockonline.com and you can check out some of my work. You can find all my social media links. Feel free to add me and all that good stuff. Ilya, where can people find you?
You can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. I had a couple of people who one of them was on the show drop in today and just say hello, which is always nice. If you
can you say who it was? It was trade secret?
It was Bill Totolo. Now
Bill Totolo is the best. He's a wonderful guy. Not only was he on the show, but he co-hosted the show when I had the deadly coronavirus.
That's right, he did. He stepped into the void that you left, Ben. He got up to bat and knocked it out of the park. Good job.
Bill's an awesome guy. Love the guy. Anyway, so that's awesome. Any other places people can find you online?
You can find me at the usual sorts of places like Facebook and LinkedIn and anywhere else where you can type in at Ilya Friedman. You might find me. Still not Snapchatting. Snapchatting's not really my thing.
I kind of wonder if Snapchat still as hot as it was. It feels like TikTok seems to have filled that space.
It's kind of like the new Snapchat. Seems like it. But I don't exist there either. So anyway, hey, let's thank some people.
Who should we thank first?
Let's thank our editor, Ben Katz, who did a good job, hopefully this time, of not making us sound too dumb. So thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. I prefer sounding erudite. We should also thank Kay Zalatrachi, who I'm sure wanted to throw in some of his thoughts and opinions about Blackmagic while we were discussing Blackmagic today. He actually in Facebook mentioned something that I had said and made it a point for debate on his Facebook page. And for the record, he seriously disagrees with me on this one topic. So that's all good. And then we should also, lastly and never leastly, want to thank Alana Cody, our amazing producer. She's got some just kick-ass interviews coming up, and she's always reaching out and being like, hey, do you want to talk to this legend? And I'm like, matter of fact, I would like to talk to that legend.
And you know what? If you're listening to us right now and you don't follow us on social media, you are missing out on the opportunity to ask questions to some of these legends. There happens to be a thing up there right now do you have any questions for Robert Yeoman? Robert Yeoman, who has shot basically every Wes Anderson movie and a whole bunch of other people's, stuff and Drugstore Cowboy and you name it. I mean, you want to ask him a question? Go to our Instagram, go to our Twitter.
We were supposed to have an interview with him just a few days ago, and he had the high-class reason to cancel that he was in an editing session with Wes. That was Wes Anderson. And it was like, no problem. Whenever he wants to come on the show, we cannot wait to talk to Robert Yeoman. His work is just unbelievably amazing.
And if you've got a question for him, go to our Twitter, go to our Instagram, and tweet at us, or Instagram comment at us what your question is, and maybe we'll ask it to him.
And maybe even attribute it to you. We've been known to do that.
Almost every time, as a matter of fact. So
yeah.
Okay. And, next time, Ben, we're going to do some listener mail. We got so much listener mail. So, hey, don't be surprised next time when we start off with all the hit parade of people saying all sorts of adoring things about us. So, hey.
I love being adored. That's great.
Yeah. It'll be the Adoration Society of the Cinematography podcast.
I look forward to it. It will make my ego more buoyant than it is even now.
All right. Well, I think that just about does it for us. Thanks for listening, everybody.
See you next week.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.